My name's Phil Williams and I would like to welcome you to Audio Angling, the podcast site of fishing, films and facts.co.uk. Hand on heart now, I can't honestly remember the first reported Gilthead Bream catch from UK waters, but what I do very clearly remember are some of the earliest reports, and as importantly, repeats of those reports in successive years, demonstrating that rather than being an occasional migrant as was first suggested, giltheads were in actual fact establishing themselves with a pattern and predictability that anglers might be able to tap into. Despite the fact that all of this took place many miles away from where I regularly fish, I noted that press reports very quickly pointed towards West Country harbours, and in particular those based on estuaries, as being the most obvious common denominator. And as time's gone by, this observation has been reinforced over and over again through catches made by anglers specialising in fishing for giltheads, one of whom I'm about to link up with here, Alex Macdonald of Sakuma Tackle. So what is it about Gilthead Bream then that makes specialising in fishing for them such an attractive proposition?
I think it's a number of things. Well, it is for me anyway, but I think probably at the top of the list would be the fights. For me, people often ban this phrase about best pound-for-pound fighter. You hear it levelled at mullet and mackerel, with good reason. But for me, I'd say the Gilthead Bream. There's a phenomenal fight they give. And I suppose, there's the other contributing factors are that they're getting more and more common now, but they're not a fish that too many people would have caught, I don't suppose. So the fact that you're fishing for something that doesn't get caught that often off our shores is, I wouldn't say it's a novelty factor, but it's a good reason. I think they're a beautiful fish as well. They're absolutely stunning to look at. They're beautiful, but they're bullish as well. They've got like I don't know the best way to describe it, sort of, but they're stunning to look at. They scrap like hell. They are very nice to eat. I personally put a lot of them back, but when I do get one that's deep hooked, or from time to time, if I just fancy one to eat, then they do make great eating as well. And the surroundings that you can catch them in, I fish estuaries for them, and they're a beautiful place in the spring and early summer, when everything's starting to green up again, and the wildlife that you see as well, generally they're quite quiet, the creeks and stuff, so more often than not you'll have them to yourself. So yeah, it's the full package really. But I'd say if I just had to pick one reason alone, I'd probably say it's the fight, the adrenaline that you get. There's no sitting watching your rod tips for a little tap or anything like that. When they hit it hard, and then that's just the start of it. They're phenomenal fighters. Even fish of £1.50, £2 will give you a good fight. And when you get the ones that are bigger than that as well, you really know about it. So yeah, that's for me the reasons that I fish for them.
Now you're quite a bit younger than me and probably won't recall all the early reports regarding what has since become an established target for the UK. So when and how did you first become aware of the species?
Well, I'm sort of relatively new to sea fishing, and I suppose 10 or 12 years is how long I've been sea fishing, and right from the very start, obviously I worked in the trade before I was sea fishing. I was doing more coarse fishing back then, but we still used to get the magazines, Sea Angler and such like, so I would often flick through the pages, and they were one of the fish that caught my eye. And I thought I'd love to catch one of them then, and funnily enough, one of my brother's friends at school actually holds the record for a Gilthead Bream. Colin Carr, £10, 6 ounce, if my memory serves me correctly. And I'd also seen other anglers holding good fish as well, and I just thought, you should catch those. They just don't look like anything else in our waters, you shouldn't catch them over here. And it straight away just caught my attention, even though I wasn't sea fishing. It was something about them. So obviously once I started sea fishing, they were one of the first species that I decided to actually target, because yeah, just for that reason alone. And obviously I'd heard about their fighting qualities and their eating qualities and all the rest of it as well. So yeah, I'd say sort of probably about 14 years ago I'd heard about them, and then when I started sea fishing, obviously I started finding out more and more about them, just because to target them I needed as much background information as possible when I first started to have a real interest in the species.
For obvious reasons, I know that gilthead specialists can be a bit reserved, and I'm not expecting too much in the way of precise details on productive locations here. So how did you come by the expertise that you've built up? Talk us through the types of things that you will be looking for at a location that might single it out as a potential gilthead mark.
Well, I'll make no bones, the first year I targeted them, I struggled a bit with them. I knew of some marks that are talked about in hushed tones that you hear through second and third parties and things like that, not fishing for an angling club or anything like that. It was just asking people. I had a rough idea of the areas and what baits they got caught on. I got a real big slice of luck in the fact that a good friend of mine who's a commercial crab fisherman actually, and he knows the estuary I fish like the back of his hand. He's fished it ever since he was a kid. He actually, through another friend, funnily enough, another commercial rod and line fisherman this time that I used to fish on the boat, I asked him for a bit of information and they actually give me a map with the areas in to try and what states of tide and things like that. So that was a real big help for me. A couple of those marks paid off big time. As I said before that, I was struggling a little bit because I didn't have much more to go on than just sort of what I'd heard second and third hand. Very rare to see another angler out fishing, so you couldn't sort of identify areas through other people fishing them and things like that. So it was all just sort of homework. But yeah, I was thrown big slice of luck really with getting that map because it did help a lot. But saying that, you've still got to put the time in and learn about the fishing. You know, not everything was there. It was just the general areas. And as I said, states of tide in some areas, but things like weather play an important part. Water clarity also plays an important part. There's lots of other things. They're a quick moving fish, you know, they don't hang around long. It's not like you can just find a mark and you'll get action all the time. It's short little spells as the fish move through, generally with the tide. And yeah, there's no substitute for putting hard work in really, and you will 9 times out of 10 get your rewards if you do put that work and effort in. These days there's a lot more written about them. Actually, I think there's an article in Sea Angler this month on gilthead fishing in Ireland, but I can recall, I think there's several articles most years written on giltheads. There's a lot of stuff on the internet, so there's a lot more information out there, not just on how to catch them, but areas to catch them, right down to marks and how to get there and stuff like that. That's one of the things that the internet especially has helped really, and they've got more popular as a result. There's a lot more people, as I said before, it used to be very rare. I would probably see maybe a handful of people in a season fishing the estuary that I fish for the giltheads. Going back probably no more than 5 or 6 years, maybe even less than that. That was the case, but the last 2 or 3 years definitely there's been a massive increase in their popularity. I think it's also because they've spread a lot more now as well. Their reach is a lot further. It used to be just a few of the estuaries down in South Cornwall and South Devon. And now there's a good fishery in Ireland, in North Wales. I'm hearing of them coming out in the Menai Straits, places like that. Even North Devon, Tor and Torridge has been throwing a few fish up towards East Devon, you know, up around the Exe, the Tean. They're getting a lot more widespread now for sure. As a consequence, they're a more realistic target for people to fish for them. So, but the original question is, yeah, there's more information out there. If people want to find it, it's there from really at the click of a mouse. And also articles in the magazines as well. So probably never been a better time really for targeting them. But yeah, there is a secret side to it. I think if you put a lot of time and effort into your fishing, you will share information with people that share information with you. But I think sometimes you want to protect what you've got yourself. I mean, I think it is being selfish to a certain extent, but I don't really see the harm in that if you've put a lot of time and effort into it. And all of a sudden you put the information all out there specifically, then you might go up to fish your favourite mark and there'll be people on it. And sometimes that will happen now with it just getting more popular, but I think there's a lot more satisfaction to catching fish if you work it out as best as you can for yourself. Obviously I've had that map that helped me out, and the internet articles and magazine articles will help as well, and you will look at them. But there's no substitute at the end of the day though for just putting the effort in and the time, fish the marks, different states of tide, different weather conditions, different times of the year even, and sometimes mornings and evenings can make a difference to bright sunlight. Over a period of time you'll work it out, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about fishing though, is even when you think you've got it worked out, then the fish will have different ideas, and so you're always thinking and trying to second guess them. But they're not a hard fish to catch once you've located them and you've got your rigs and your bait and everything sorted out. They're not a difficult fish to catch. In fact, I don't think there is many fish in the sea that are difficult to catch, with maybe the exception of the mullet when they're in the estuaries possibly. I think most of the fish, they're not like coarse fish where they're excessively caught and returned, even though a lot more people are doing catch and release now. Still think they're wild fish and they don't have as much chance to learn by association as their coarse fishing brothers and sisters. So yeah, once you've located them, you should be able to catch them without too much trouble. Landing them though could be a different matter.
For the sake of perspective, it might help at this point to talk through some of the biological details of the gilthead, which have helped anglers in targeting it as a species more effectively. For example, its hard fighting qualities, preference for rough weedy inshore ground, and its powerful shell-crushing jaws. In fact, fish expert Alwyn Wheeler in his classic book The Fishes of the British Isles and North West Europe describes the gilthead as being exceedingly rare and therefore of little interest to anglers. also as a species where all occurrences should be noted.
Yeah, a lot of good points raised there, to be honest with you. There is another book, my brother got it for me a few years back, and I can't remember the name of the gentleman now. I believe he's Italian. It's only a small book. Again, the article this month in Sea Angler, they mentioned this book. It's quite detailed. It goes into the salinity levels in the water and a lot of things like that, and atmospheric conditions and things. They can prove to be factors, but there's a lot of interesting reading in there. I mean, in the Mediterranean, they target these fish. They get them off the coasts as well as within the estuary systems. But in this country, as a rule, most of the times they seem to be targeted within the estuaries. A lot of anglers do fish the beaches and the shores, and you would think they would pick up more of them if they were viable areas. Yet for some reason, they do seem to be more of an estuary fish in this country.
What about the commercials? Are they not showing any interest yet?
They were allowed to net the estuary for mullet, basically. They weren't allowed to put static nets out. They could go out and they could basically seam net, drift in for the mullet. Unfortunately, there was quite a few unscrupulous people, and they weren't just targeting the mullet. If they got the giltheads and the bass and things like that in there, they were obviously taken as well. You needed a licence to do this, and I'm pretty sure quite a few people didn't have these licences either. I don't know. Basically, it wasn't unusual for a couple of seasons to turn up at 4 o'clock in the morning and you'd hear the clank of nets on the side of the boat, and out of the mist you'd see boats going up netting, and you could fish one creek one day, you'd have a good session, and then you'd see a boat going out, and then the next day you'd go up there and it was dead. You wouldn't see the mullet in the edge. You wouldn't catch any bream, very few bass, things like that. And you knew it was having an effect. And I've got friends that fish the estuaries for mullet, and they noticed in recent years they were targeting the mullet, so that's obvious. But one friend of mine said that he was on holiday, and I think he fished for 3 days on the trot. Every day he said he'd seen the same boat going out and just constantly netting the mullet and whatever else and taking them back and just keeping on going the whole time, like full throughout the day, because where he was fishing there was always water there. And you can't tell me that that's not going to have an effect. People tried to do stuff about it, but nothing really happened. It just really seemed to get worse. But I did hear that apparently now that all the people that had licences to net the estuary have been sent letters. I think it's something to do with, is it the Duchy of Cornwall or something like that? Anyway, I'm not sure. Saying they're no longer allowed to net the estuaries. So some estuaries it was banned anyway, places like the Exe, because the salmon runs that they get up those estuaries, but other estuaries it wasn't banned for whatever reason. So yeah, it was really just a bit of a free rein, and people were taking a lot of advantage of it in my view. But luckily, I think people have seen sense now, or enough people have moaned and complained about it, and apparently that has been stopped. But the thing, as I said earlier, I think some of these people didn't even have licences in the first place, so they wouldn't have had a letter. So will they just carry on? I don't know. I mean, who's also going to police this? I still think that they probably will get netted, the estuaries, but I think now at least you can actually, well, I'm presuming you could ring the police or someone anyway, and they will do something about it. I mean, you'd like to think so, if it's illegal, that will happen. So hopefully you'll see the numbers start to increase again, not just the giltheads, but also the mullet and the bass and that as well. So yeah, that part of the question is undoubtedly that they have become a viable option to be fished for, whether it's, we call it commercial or whatever, I'm not really sure, but taken for money, that's for definite. Other points, they are, like I say, a very hard fighting fish. Their shape dictates that a bream, it's almost contradictory, because when I used to course fish a lot, a bream in freshwater is probably the worst fighting fish you could stick a hook in. They were absolutely dreadful. It'd be like dragging in a wet towel at best. Even big fish you used to catch sometimes up around 10 pound in weight wouldn't give you any sort of fight whatsoever, really. So when you think of a bream in the sea, it's completely the opposite. Especially the giltheads. Mind you, black bream and Coochie's bream do fight as well, but I'd say they haven't got a patch on a gilthead, not for me. A lot of it's down to their deep-bodied shape, and as I said, they've got a very bullish head, like it's sort of quite blunt, and yeah, they've got a lovely distinctive yellow band that runs across between the eyes, and lovely coloration on their gill plates. They go from mauve to scarlet, just beautiful colours. When they get bigger, the colours really come out on them. They've got lovely black tips to their fins as well, and stunning looking fish. It's just absolutely beautiful. But yeah, they pack a punch as well. They really do. And as I say, at deep body, they can hold in the tide. And they've got you look at their tail, you can see where they generate the power from as well. So they've just got all that attributes for a great fighting sport fish, really. And, that is exactly what they are. You will get bass running through with the giltheads, and straight away you hook a bass, say a pound or so, something like that, 12 ounces. It will come straight up to the top and you'll just reel it in. You hook a gilthead about the same sort of size and you'll know the difference straight away, like. So, great fighting fish. I mean, as I said a couple of times before, I think that's the main thing about them, is just the fact that they fight like hell.
You say estuaries, but these are dynamic transitional habitats with the brackish zone between sufficient and insufficient salinity and all the knock-on effects that can bring rarely being the same from one day to the next. So where precisely within an estuary would you be looking?
You want to fish the channels. I've always found that you need to be close to a channel where you've got the hard bottom where the rivers or the streams will run through. I've no doubt that you can catch them on the mud, maybe on the edge of the weeds and stuff like that would probably be worth maybe a chance, but I've always found the main channels. So as long as you've got a hard bottom and you're fishing into the main channels, then that's the areas to generally target them. As I said, they're a nomadic fish. They move with the tides. They'll come through feeding as they go, and they'll work their way through the tide. Ideally, you need to have an estuary that's local to you, so you can nip down and either just fish for short sessions when you think they're going to be coming through, or if you were fishing a longer session, you'd probably want to look at finding somewhere you could move several times as you could follow the fish through. You know, as I said, you'd be very lucky if you could find a mark where you just have a chance of fish at any state of tide. No doubt there probably is one or two spots that is possible, but as a rule of thumb, I don't know any. So yeah, give yourselves options to be able to move with the fish as they come through. Note the times they come through on the flood, because they might run on the back, even though that isn't always the case. But yeah, I suppose the best pointer I can give is look for the hard channels and fish in them. A lot of estuaries will just have big areas of flat mud and stuff like that. Not bad areas for fishing for flounder and stuff maybe, but they wouldn't be an area I'd target for the Gilthead Bream. I'm not saying that's definite because I don't know for sure, but I've had much more success fishing in the channels.
This actually fits in very nicely with arguably the number one bait for giltheads, which is crab. Estuaries and harbours are prime locations for crabs to take refuge in and peel, with the first flush coming in the spring, followed by a second smaller burst towards the back end and a steady stream of peeling in between. So does the crab moulting season, which varies year on year in its timing and can go on for longer along the Devon and Cornish coast, have anything to do with the timing and location of Gilthead Bream?
Definitely, yeah. I think the giltheads first come into the estuaries to feed on the crab. It seems to coincide with the first sort of proper molts of the crab. It's noticeable, actually, that crab is the best bait early season, I think, anyway. And then you find it starts to lose its effectiveness as you get into the summer. And like lugworm tends to come into its own a little bit more then. But yeah, they feed on crustaceans. But if you do keep one for the table, it's a good tip, really, with any fish, to be honest with you, is have a look in the sack and its stomach just to see what they've been feeding on. And 9 times out of 10 you'll find small crabs. That seems to be their preferred diet at the early part of the season. I know on the continent, shellfish, mussels and things like that. I haven't mentioned it before, but you know, you have a look inside their gobs and they're just these crushing plates. They've got phenomenal mouths. They're made for crunching fish or shellfish. Yeah, they're well equipped, really well equipped, and they'll smash small crabs and small mussels, things like that, with no problem at all. I actually remember reading an article in a French fishing magazine once, and they were fishing for them with mussels, and they were actually opening the mussels up with a knife and actually putting the hook inside the mussel, so there was no point exposed or anything, and that's how they fished for them. The fish would just come along and just smash the mussel and then obviously get hooked. I'm not very fluent in French, but I could see from the pictures and the diagrams, and they're much like coarse anglers would. They'd sit there with a bucket of small mussels and a nut hammer, and they would crack each mussel with a nut hammer and then catapult it out with a coarse fishing catapult, and that's how they ground baited and ledger a whole mussel with a hook right inside it. The odd time I've found the odd small little, don't know what they are, little clams and stuff in the mud and given them a go, but I've never had any joy with them. But I've only tried it on a few occasions, not enough to prove it either way, but I suppose it's one of those, you know what works and you stick with that. But I think early season, in the UK waters, peeler crabs, it's hard to beat. I've heard other people using small hardbacks as well and just putting the hook through them, and I can see the sense in that definitely as well, but again, it's not something I've tried as yet. You're lucky down here in the southwest, got an easy supply of crab. You can buy them regularly, but they're just as easy to find even when you're fishing, so your bait's sorted really, and if it's working for you and catching, then you kind of stick with it. But I think there's definitely room to experiment with shellfish, especially if you're fishing. Some of the estuaries have shellfish farms, mussel farms and things like that on them, and to me that is going to be more of a natural food on those estuaries. So yeah, I'd maybe try, give them a go, but my 2 top baits are a peeler crab and then lugworm later in the year. I've heard also that ragworm can be quite good as well, even though I've never really tried it myself.
What's the situation with regard to tackle and tactics?
As I said, they fight hard, and you have got the potential to catch big bream, so your tackle needs to be up to the job. In my view, there's no point hooking fish if you can't land them. Don't get me wrong, If you've got clear water all in front of you with no channel markers or weed or nothing like that, you could fish light and get a really enjoyable fight out of them. But most of the areas that I fished, you can't use that type of tackle. I use a rod called a Coniflex Assassin. That's not just a plug for Coniflex. 11 foot, they're rated I think at 2 to 3 ounces, but as with a lot of rods, I think they're slightly overrated anyway. You know, I find 3 ounces about perfect really for fishing the estuary a lot. I just get a pear lead and flatten it down myself with a lump hammer so it holds the bottom a little bit better. I find a static bait is better than a moving bait. That's the rod that I like to use for them. I find it's perfect, really. It's got enough power in it to handle 3 ounces of lead, to cope with the fight they give you, and also the weed that comes through as well. You know, sometimes you'd be reeling in loads of weed, but it's still got enough so you can enjoy the fight from the fish. You know, I'd say probably if I had to class it, it's a stepped up spinning rod maybe. It's definitely not like a carp rod. It's much more power in it than that. So yeah, that would probably be the best thing to describe it, is like a stepped up spinning rod. I do know people that will use carp rods for them. Again, they would do the job, but for me, I don't think they're quite potent. Saying that now, you can get carp rods that are rated up to 4-pound test curb and stuff, so they'll probably be more than fine. But for me, that Assassin's a great rod. You need a reel. I'd say you want a reel that's got a good drag on it. I personally like using fixed ball reels. I tend to find front drags on fixed balls are better than rear drags. They just seem to be better, and it is essential to have your drag set properly. You know, you want it set so the fish can take line, but you don't want it too loose. My train of thought is the mouths on the Gilthead Bream. As I said before, they're really, really hard. And you want to set the hook in that mouth, you know, and to do that, you need a really sharp hook. And the braided line helps as well with having little stretch in it, even though I do always use a leader. But yeah, there's a lot less stretch using a leader and braid than there is just using mono straight through. And by using a sharp hook and hitting the fish hard, you've got a better chance of hooking up with them. They are frustrating fish because you will miss a lot of bites. You will lose quite a lot of fish with the hooks dropping out. It's just the nature of, as I said, the way they fight. Their mouths does make it tricky sometimes to get a really good hook hold. Not all the time. Sometimes you'll get like a little lightish bite and you wouldn't think there's too much of it. And then when you strike, there'll be a bream on and it'll take the hook right back. But more times than not, they'll pluck at the bait, much like a wrasse will. Eventually, when you feel the bite being a little bit more than a pluck, that's generally the time to hit them. But I find holding the rod once you start to get the bite helps, and as soon as you feel it go around a little bit more, then just whack it as hard as you can. The danger you do have, though, is if you miss the bite, 9 times out of 10 they won't come back again. You just got to wait for a fresh fish to come through, because it's gone if you miss one. Like if you strike and you miss it, that's what I've found. Obviously, the sharpness of the hooks as well. Use a good chemically sharpened hook. But check your hook, you know, again, it's a good tip. With any fish, you should always check your hook after you catch a fish. In fact, after you reel in every time, because you're fishing on the shaly bottoms and there's a chance that the point might turn over. As soon as you lose that sticky sharpness, I get rid of the hook and put another one on, because once you've stuck one in one of their mouths, when it comes out, it'll have taken the sharpness off. You can check them, and if it feels still sharp enough to you, then, you know, carry on using it. But more times than not, you'll notice that it's not as sharp as it was once you stuck it in the fish. So yeah, make sure your hooks are sharp, really. And again, it's just judging your pattern to your bait. I do know people that use Aberdeen hooks from when they're using worm baits, but for me, I like the shorter shank. I use our own company's Shinu hook. There's plenty of companies out there that produce Shinu hooks, and I find they're probably about the best hook for the bream. They're slightly offset. They've got a beak point. They're just a nice sort of shape, perfect for crab. But they're all right for lug as well, because the eye isn't too offset. It's still fairly straight, so you can thread the lug up without damaging it too much. So they're my choice of hooks. But yeah, if you like using Aberdeens and then they're working for you, then use an Aberdeen. But I find the sort of the Shinu type pattern probably the best out there for it, in my view.
When we were chatting earlier before switching the recorder on, you mentioned one angler being physically sick after having his hands full with a good fish, then losing it.
Yeah, I did. I actually rethought about that, because the chap who told me about it, I'd heard it from a couple of different people, and I think actually now, I don't think he did actually lose the fish. I believe he landed it. I think it was about £4, which is a good fish. And yeah, he was so excited with the way it fought and everything that he was actually physically sick. I can relate to that. I've never actually been physically sick, but I don't think I've had the adrenaline pumping through me quite as much as what I've had when I've hooked a fish that's taken 40 yards of prey from a reel against the tide. Like, it's rare in sea fishing that you get that sort of chance. I suppose tope off the shore, that's one of the other fish that's done it. Big eels will do it, you know, they won't take 40 yards off you or so, but they'll give you a fair old go. But, you know, because of the dynamic of the fish, the way they, you know, the speed that they go as well, yeah. Not all the time. Some will just hold you in the channels and nod around a bit and go on shorter runs, but quite often the bigger fish will hit you and they'll hit you hard. And I think nothing of taking 40 or 50 yards off a tight clutch. And when your rod's flattened, it's one of those times you just pray, for me anyway, the first thing that goes through your mind is, I really hope that all my gear is true. Like, you just pray that all those knots that you tied, your leader knot, everything is right, because you know that this fish is going to test it to its limits. And as I said, that's a rarity in sea fishing, really. It doesn't happen too often. And I suppose because you can fish in the estuaries and you can fish relatively lighter, you don't need to use beach casters and big multipliers and things like that. Distance isn't a factor, and you can get away with using 3 ounces of weight and sometimes even less. So you get to appreciate the quality, the fighting prowess of the fish. As I said, it's just one of them. You can feel that adrenaline just coursing through you, and I can totally understand why someone was sick from the experience. But I suppose it's the few occasions that you'll actually be happy to be sick, I think, really, if you're looking down on a big Gilthead Bream. Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about your own experiences now. Give us some specific examples of encounters, both successful and not so, that for whatever reason have stuck in your mind.
I've fished a lot from over the years, and my best is only just shy of £5. I've had quite a lot of fish between £4 and £5. I've also lost some good fish. I'm not saying any of them have been any better than those ones that I've landed, because fish of that sort of stamp will give you a good fight, but I've definitely lost fish in that sort of class. I feel a little bit, I don't know, I say unlucky in a way, but the estuary I fish, it has done some big fish over the years, and it does still do the odd good fish. But if you get a gilt at over £4, I'd even say probably over £3.5, it is a good fish for there. There is other estuaries, some of the ones down in Cornwall do seem to produce the bigger fish these days. If you're prepared to travel around and fish different estuaries from them, you've probably got a better chance on the Cornish estuaries of getting like a big fish, like a sort of 7-8 pounder. I dearly love one that size, but I think I'm a little bit of a stickler. I kind of like where I fish, and I want to get one from there. So I sort of a bit pig-headed, you could say, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, that's my PB, as I said, just shy of £5, which I am still very happy with. But I'd really love a bigger one. I'd say I fish 7 or 8 pound or something. Well, just anything that would beat that one would be great. But all of those fish give me brilliant fights, as I mentioned before, stripping lots and lots of braid off the reels and giving you a few hairy moments in the edge, especially as most of the marks have weed beds around the edges, and that they quite often will dive. They'll take their initial run and then they'll swim straight at you and dive into the nearest weed bed. So another reason for using strong tackle, and I wouldn't advocate using multi-hook rigs either for them for that reason alone. If they dive into the weed and you've got a spare hook there trailing around, is more likely to catch up. So yeah, single hooks rule really for that sort of fishing if you want to have the best chance of landing them when you catch them. Good sessions, little short sessions. Lucky enough, I live very close to the estuary, and I could nip down after work or even sometimes before work for an hour or two's fishing, and first light, sitting there, it's just the sun starting to come up, maybe catching 3 or 4 nice Gilthead Bream in an hour's fishing or so. And other days where you've had to work really hard for your fish, you'll start off in one area, you'll catch them, and then you'll work up, sometimes walking miles and miles to fish different spots and doing it all again, and absolutely exhausting, but worth every minute of it when it comes right. You can also, in the equation, put those days when it doesn't come right, and it seems like it never seems like a waste of time, I don't think, because I always enjoyed fishing anyway. It isn't always just about the fish, but obviously they're the most important bit. So yeah, other things like walking through cornfields to get to marks and coming sort of face to face with deer, stags and things like that, seeing fox cubs sort of playing on the opposite bank no more than 50 yards away from when you're fishing at first light. I've seen deer swim across estuaries since then, swim across the creeks as well on more than one occasion. I mean, that's something to be sat there and still as a bone, and then see a deer come down and swim across the estuary and get out within 20 yards away from you and shake its coat. Birds of prey, sparrow hawks, things like that, taking birds in the hedges behind you. I can think of those weasels. One day they call them a bogle, apparently, when you see more than one weasel. I looked it up, and sitting on a little rock mark, and yeah, 3 weasels, must have been a mum or a dad, and 2 young ones come literally 5 yards away from me, sort of walking across the rocks. All those things like that, they make it more than just about the actual fishing. But that's all sort of forgotten now as soon as you get that first proper pluck that the bream are coming through. And it's so exciting because when they do come through, it's a hectic little period, and you'll get bites, you'll miss bites, you'll catch a fish, you'll sometimes catch several fish, and then they'll be gone, and then you might get another group come through a little bit later, or you might decide that you want to see if you can keep in touch with that group. So they're just some of the ones that just spring to mind really. But all the bigger ones, all the ones over £4, are all well ingrained in my memory. It only seems like it's yesterday, and I suppose it's the only fish that I look forward to I love targeting fish throughout the seasons, and I look forward to the flounder season, the cod season, the plaice season, and all the rest of it. I look forward to the giltheads more than anything else. I will put quite a few trips in even before it's a little bit too early, just to make sure you're not missing out on anything so you can make the most of it. And I've got lots of good memories of a lot of other types of fishing as well, but I think if someone said to me you can only fish one species for the rest of your life, that one species for me, it would be the Gilthead Bream for sure, yeah.
I hear that from what started as a rather localised invasion along the south coast back in those early days, has in more recent times seen the Gilthead Bream expanding its range.
Yeah, I'm presuming it's water temperature. I don't know. I've got no scientific sort of knowledge on what it is, but I think it must be the fact they used to get them down in the southwest and nowhere else because the water always used to be warmer here, and from what I hear, people say the water temperature is gradually increasing. So that's why I think you're starting to see them spread further and further afield. Not just the bream, but I think other fish as well, like triggerfish seem to be getting caught further afield, and you're starting to see more couches, bream, and other species that are more associated with the Mediterranean. Red mullet and things like that as well, even though they have always been taken from the southern areas, they do seem to be getting more widespread now. So I'd say it's probably got something to do with the water temperature rising a little bit. I can't see any other reason. I can't see that the Gilthead bream population has just exploded because pretty much all other species that are good to eat get hammered by commercial fishing. So I'm sure the Gilthead is no exception. So I can't seem to sort of find any rational thought in that's a reason for it. So yeah, the only really one I can come up with is that the waters are warming up slowly and they're just increasing their range because of it.
What about the future?
Well, as I touched on earlier, I think estuaries, maybe it's a little hypocritical because I fish the estuaries with rod and line. Why should I say who shouldn't fish those estuaries? I do put a lot of the fish I catch back, but that's only through choice. I've got no problem if people want to keep them and eat them because they are great eating, but I would say put the smaller ones back, definitely. I don't even know if there is a minimum size for bream to take like there is for bass. If there isn't, then there should be, because you shouldn't be taking juvenile fish, in my opinion, no matter what the species are. So yeah, if there isn't a minimum size, then there definitely should be one put into place. They should definitely, in my view, stop the netting in the estuaries for any species, because they are safe havens for small fish, and fish have got to have somewhere where they can't get hammered all the time. And again, I know it's slightly hypocritical because we are fishing from the rod and line, but you can't tell me anglers with bait are going to do anywhere near the damage that sweeping nets. It's not just, I've seen nets being strung out across estuary creeks, so everything that's in the estuary gets, as the tide goes out, it take everything. I think it just needs to be stopped, the netting of the estuaries, for me. And it sounds like they are doing that now, if what I've been told is the truth. So that is a good thing. Don't keep them for the sake of keeping them. If you don't want to eat it, then put it back. And definitely put the smaller ones back. There is an argument for saying keep the smaller ones and put the bigger ones back because they're the breeding fish. But I don't know. My view is if it's undersized or it's too small really to give you a good feed, then you should put it back anyway. So that would make a difference. It's not going to hurt, is it? Other than that, just look after the estuaries as well. It's not just about the fish, as I hope I've got through. It's don't leave litter and access points and that. Think about it. Don't block farmers' driveways and leave cars willy-nilly all over the place, and disrespect your surroundings and everything else. Don't leave hooks and stuff laying around because people walk their dogs along the foreshore and stuff like that. So just treat the place with respect and the fish,
So for the Gilthead at least, the future then looks reasonably good.
I think it does, yeah. I think it does. More and more people are targeting them. There's more, as we sort of glossed over earlier, it's they're getting more and more popular. Saying that, I don't think you can just take it as gospel that they're going to... I think fish have good seasons, not always linked to commercial pressure, but breeding and weather conditions. So, last season on the estuary I fish, it wasn't the best season, to be honest with you. But other estuary systems that weren't really known as good bream estuaries had really good seasons. So, sometimes I think they can move around a bit. I don't think they're not there in the winter months, that's for sure, because you pick them up when you're flounder fishing. They're a migrant, they come in, so I think they will move around a bit as well. So I think some seasons you'll have good bream fishing and then in one estuary maybe not so good in the other estuary. That's definitely what it seemed like to me last year. So I think the future is rosy. They're getting more widespread. The more people have got access to fish them. They're a great sporting fish, so I think it's good that more people have got that chance to fish for them. But I'm not saying that it's just going to get better and better and the estuaries are just going to be filled with loads of Gilthead bream all the time, because my hand on my heart, I'd love it if it was true, but I don't think that is the case. I think there was a lot more and a lot bigger fish in the estuaries, or some of them, going back 10, 15 years ago, And I think for whatever reason, probably commercial pressure maybe in the Mediterranean more. So I think that's where they go to in the winter. They overwinter, I believe, in the Mediterranean, and they come over here to feed. And yeah, they could get a hammering over there by the Spanish and the French trawlers. But I think things are starting to improve, and I'd like to think they will carry on getting better, but I don't think it's a given. There's just not enough known really about them over here. I don't think to form a consensus that that's just going to be the case, that just because they're getting a bit more widespread, that's always going to be the case, because if they do come over in these numbers, they are worth a lot of money, and the commercial interest will grow. And I have heard of commercial netters, more by accident, I think, than anything else, catching them out on the coast before they actually get into the estuaries. So that might become more and more prevalent if they continue to come in bigger numbers and further afield. Trawling and things like that on a big scale is probably the reason why a lot of the species we get over here, we don't get as many as what you're used to. So, I think there's still issues there with that, yeah.
Even so, it's still nice to hear of a success story for a change, however small and localised it might happen to be. Next thing for me is to get down there and actually give it a go myself. I've caught plenty of small ones in the past from the shore in Tunisia, so I know that they can go some. But you can't beat doing the same job on home soil, and in that regard, I'm far better armed now than I was 40 minutes ago. So many thanks to Alex Macdonald for partying with that information.